objective today is to provide just a high-level summary of the concepts in House Bill 1550, which is currently in the Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness Committee. And rather than go through the fiscal note, which is rather lengthy, and it is available online, it's about 69 pages, I've prepared a one-page summary of the revenues. The bill legalizes the possession of cannabis for adults effective July 1st, 2013. It also authorizes the Liquor Control Board to license, tax, and sell cannabis. The bill establishes a state tax of 15% per gram of cannabis sold. There's also provisions requiring agricultural farmers wishing to produce, process, or package cannabis to obtain an annual $5,000 license. And finally, the bill requires all revenues received by the Liquor Control Board to get distributed by formula to the Department of Health, Division of Alcohol and Substance Abuse, the Department of Agriculture, cities, counties, and the Liquor Control Board. What you see in the table are revenues that begin next biennium. The top line is the estimated gross sales that the Liquor Control Board has estimated it would receive. The biennial total is a little over $1.1 billion. After reducing for costs of goods sold and adding back the license revenue, the net revenue to the cannabis account is about $363 million for the 13-15 biennium. Those revenues get distributed by formula down below, and you can see, for example, the Department of Health would receive the bulk of the funds, 75%, just over $272 million. Alcohol and substance abuse, $72 million, which is 20%, and then small amounts for ag and liquor control for their role in implementing, and 1% each to cities and counties. I also would note that the sale of cannabis would be subject to the retail sales and B&O taxes. Those dollars are generated, estimated at $77 million, distributed as those are now to the state general fund and also to locals. That makes the net state revenues a little over $441 million. And just to show the distribution in 13-15, down below in that lower box, it shows the general fund and the local sales tax distributions. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Olson, I understand that the sale of cannabis is today covered by a sales tax. Are we collecting that in any significant amount?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, Representative Chandler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, this revolving account would be considered near general fund?
I actually don't know if it was termed that or not. I'd have to check on that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. So we're going to start. Representative Dickerson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, I'm Representative Mary Lou Dickerson. In these trying times, do you think that $440 million in new revenue would be of interest? I hope so. The $440 million is split, as Jeff said, between health, substance abuse, prevention and intervention, and for the implementation of the bill through the Liquor Control Board and Agriculture. So what would it buy? There would be $272 million that during the biennium that would go simply to health care, and it's up to us to make those decisions. That could be the basic health plan, it could be maternal and infant care, it could be disability, lifeline medical. It's totally up to the legislature to decide. Another $72 million in substance abuse prevention and intervention, and it's my hope that we would decide to target a lot of that money to youth. Finally, there'd be the 5% would be left, as I said, to go for implementation of the bill and a small split between cities and counties. That leaves an additional $77 million in undesignated general fund money, quite a bit of money. Let's do just a little bit of history about hemp. This was new to me, so I assume it's going to be new to many of you. But the United States has a long history regarding hemp. Thomas Jefferson It was quoted quite a bit about hemp, and one thing that I'll quote is that he said that hemp is of the first necessity to the wealth and protection of our country. The history of hemp in the U.S. goes back, however, to the beginning, goes back to the founding of Jamestown, one of our first settlements. And they had the first cannabis law, and it wasn't banning cannabis, it was doing the opposite. It was telling farmers they had to grow cannabis. Cannabis was used as legal tender from 1631 until the early 1800s. It was used in textiles for Old Glory, our flag. It was used in the first two drafts of the Declaration of Independence. So it's been part of this country for a very long time. Fast forward to the 20th century, and almost every adult in the country at the dawn of the 20th century knew about cannabis. Yet doctors didn't believe it was habit forming, and they didn't believe that it caused antisocial behavior or violence. Then in 1937, with only one hearing and by a voice vote, Congress decided to ban cannabis. They did so against the very strong objections of the American Medical Association. So what's happened in the last 70 years of prohibition? Well, at the point that it was banned, about 60,000 Americans used cannabis. Now we're at 25 million to 50 million people use cannabis regularly per year. I don't think prohibition has worked. We need something new, and that something is to legalize, to regulate, and to tax cannabis. Now let me be clear, I don't support legalization because I want to see more people use cannabis. I support it because I know an incredible amount of people actually do use it. Why shouldn't the state reap the benefits from that use rather than drug cartels or criminals? Not only will the state generate profits, it will also decrease costs because the state spends about $25 million a year to arrest, to incarcerate, and to provide for the prosecution of people who simply have possession. So let me get a little bit of water here because my mouth is dry. Okay.
Representative Dickerson, you have very little time left.
Okay. There's also domestic hemp, which would be of great value to us. We can grow it here and reap the economic development benefits. I would say that one argument you probably will hear is that we shouldn't do this. Well, the argument that every state should wait for the federal government would guarantee that no one actually takes the lead in dealing and providing for saner policies. That's why the Seattle Times agreed that Washington should be the national leader in replacing the failed policy of prohibition. $440 million, an additional $50 million per biennium in savings, additional money from the sale of industrial hemp. It's a powerful amount of money. We grew up with marijuana. It's time we grow up about marijuana. I urge you to pass this legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move to the modified first panel. I understand that there's some travel issues, and we'll start with Pete Holmes, John McKay, and Tim Burgess.
Thank you, Chairman. Hunter, could you remind me again how much time we have?
You have 10 minutes for the whole panel.
Okay, great.
And how you split that up, it's up to you guys.
Thank you. I'll be as brief as I
Thanks.
possibly can. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I am Peter Holmes, Seattle's elected city attorney, and I'm here in support of legalization, taxation, and regulation of marijuana for adult recreational use. The only clear result members of this committee should be aware of as far as marijuana prohibition has been is to create a highly profitable market for the product itself and to relinquish its control to criminals. I'm here to speak unequivocally in support of ending this prohibition in favor of a rational and regulated manner, and welcome this discussion and this the discussion in this work session about how we can move toward a post-prohibition system. But since this is the Ways and Means Committee, I wanted to first address the bottom line. Based upon the legislature's fiscal note, Seattle estimates that its share of revenue from the sale of cannabis, as contemplated under 1550, will be from at least $500,000 to $1 million annually at the start. And based on the fiscal note, the state share, of course, would be much higher. The savings in our police, law, and courts, as well as in our jail budgets, is harder to estimate, but would in my opinion, easily add a similar amount to budget relief for the city of Seattle. The end of our war on cannabis will also allow us to address other public safety concerns that are not presently adequately funded. Make no mistake, however, even in the absence, without these promised revenues, it still makes sense to end marijuana prohibition. It is a practical failure, and it is a misuse of both taxpayer dollars and the government's authority over the people. We long ago agreed as a society that substances should not be outlawed by the government simply because they can be harmful if misused or consumed in excess. Alcohol, food, and even cars can be extremely dangerous under certain circumstances, and cigarettes are almost always harmful in the long run. All of these things kill many people every year, but we don't try to ban them because we can't and we don't need to. Instead, we regulate their manufacture and use, we tax them, and we encourage those who choose to use them to do so in a responsible manner. You will no doubt hear fears expressed by opponents of legalization, and as a criminal prosecutor and as a parent of 2 young adults, I can fully relate to these concerns. But as you hear these fears expressed, please ask yourself and ask of your witnesses, how might that fear be rooted in prohibition itself? In other words, don't let yourself get caught up in this fear, but simply recognize that it's difficult for anyone to envision a legalization landscape for cannabis has been driven underground by prohibition. Ask instead that people justify continued cannabis prohibition, and they will invariably cite concerns that are a result of prohibition itself or are indistinguishable from other substances that are not banned. I'm going to close and leave some time for questions as well as for the other members of this panel. I do want to say that I applaud the efforts of Representative Dickerson for introducing this legislation and starting this conversation. I believe it is very likely, though, to lead to a successful citizens initiative if the legislature doesn't step up and do the right thing first. And as a prosecutor, that worries me terribly. Ending marijuana prohibition and focusing on rational regulation and taxation is a pro-public health, pro-limited government policy, and I urge the legislature to move down this road. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, my name is John McKay. I'm the former United States Attorney here in the Western District of Washington. I'm currently a law professor at Seattle University, speaking here, of course, in a private capacity. Thank you for inviting me. I want to just address briefly in my remarks the threat posed by the black market of marijuana. I believe that it is a dangerous law enforcement threat, and it exists because of our failed policies on marijuana, in particular our failed attempt to prohibit marijuana. Marijuana prohibition has failed at the federal level, it's failed at the state level, it's failed at the local level, and the result, even if you take